The holiday gathering was my mother's favorite production of the year. She started planning it in October. The menu, the seating, the centerpieces made from pine cones and dried orange slices that she'd seen in a magazine and recreated faithfully every December since 2014. The house smelled like cinnamon and roasting meat from the moment you walked through the door, and she accepted compliments about it with the practiced modesty of someone who had been waiting for them. 30 family members packed into the living and dining rooms, kids running between adult legs, the older relatives installed in the good chairs near the fireplace. Everybody loud and warm and slightly too full by 7 o'clock. I had been coming to this gathering my entire life. I knew every face in that room, every family story, every old argument that never quite got resolved and just got folded into the fabric of how we all operated together. I knew the room. I thought I knew what to expect from it. I was wrong about that last part. My name is Natalie. I'm 34. I've been the registered agent and majority shareholder of Callaway Hardware and Supply since I was 29, when my grandfather officially transferred ownership to me 18 months before he passed. The business was his life's work. He started it in 1979 with a single storefront, a truck, and a wholesale account he'd negotiated himself by driving 4 hours to shake someone's hand in person. By the time I was old enough to understand what he'd built, there were 3 locations, a commercial supply division, and a reputation in our region that was older than most of our competitors. My grandfather was not a sentimental man. He was practical, unsentimental about money, and deeply suspicious of anyone who wanted something for reasons they couldn't articulate clearly. He chose me because I asked the right questions. I started working summers at the original location when I was 16. Not because my parents suggested it, but because I asked my grandfather if I could. I wanted to understand how something real got built. I spent 3 summers learning inventory, supplier relationships, and how to read a balance sheet without making it look like I was struggling. My grandfather noticed. He started explaining things to me that he didn't explain to anyone else. Margin decisions, long-term contracts, the reasoning behind choices that looked conservative from the outside but were actually strategic. My sister Renee was 12 years into a career in marketing. She was talented at her work. I say that without reservation. She was good with brands, good with optics, good at building the kind of visible presence that gets people talking. She had done some consulting work for Callaway about 4 years ago, a brand refresh that updated our logo and redesigned our customer-facing materials. It was solid work. Cost us $40,000 on a proper contract and we paid it. Renee liked to describe that period as the time she rebuilt the company's identity. She was not wrong that the rebrand had been valuable. She was dramatically overestimating her ownership of it. When my grandfather transferred the business to me, Renee got a cash distribution from his estate. A significant one. Enough to pay off her apartment and put money into investments. My grandfather had thought it through and made his decision and documented it properly, and at the time nobody said a word about it being unfair. That was 5 years ago. A lot can change when someone's financial situation gets uncomfortable. Renee's agency had lost 2 major clients in the past year. The contracts hadn't been renewed. Nothing dramatic, just the ordinary contraction that happens in her industry during tight budget cycles. But it had shaken her confidence and thinned her income, and I knew from conversations with my mother that Renee had been spending the past several months quietly anxious about her stability. I felt for her. I genuinely did. What I did not feel was that Callaway Hardware and Supply was the solution to her anxiety. My attorney's name is Diana Cho. She had been my corporate counsel since I took over the business, sharp and precise and constitutionally incapable of softening information she thought you needed clearly. I had texted her at 4 in the afternoon, 2 hours before the gathering started. I have a feeling tonight might get complicated. Can you be on standby? She replied in 6 minutes. Already near your parents' neighborhood for another thing. Text me if you need me and I'll be there in 20. I don't entirely know what made me reach out. A tone in my mother's voice during a call earlier in the week. A comment my father had made at Thanksgiving about family businesses belonging to the whole family, which I'd absorbed without responding to at the time. The specific way Renee had hugged me when I arrived that evening. Too long, too warm, with the quality of someone who knows something you don't. I noticed all of it and said nothing and set my phone to volume on. Dinner was served at 6:30. By 8 the plates were cleared and people had settled into that comfortable post-dinner looseness. Wine glasses still in hand, kids falling asleep in corners, the room warm and slightly dim. My father stood up. He didn't tap a glass. He just stood, and the room gave him its attention because it always did. He was the kind of man who occupied space with authority, who had been the center of family gatherings since his own father died and left him the role. He talked about legacy. He talked about what the Callaway name meant. Not just the business but the history behind it, the grandfather who built it, the family it had supported across 3 generations. He talked about it with genuine feeling, and I sat across the room listening and trying to locate where the feeling was going. Then I found it. Renee has given this family's business its modern face, he said. She built what people see when they look at Callaway today. And it's time that contribution was recognized properly. Natalie will be transferring a controlling share of Callaway hardware to Renee. It's already been discussed, and we're announcing it tonight because this family deserves to celebrate together. 30 people heard it. Several of them started nodding with the reflexive approval of people who trust the person speaking. 2 of my aunts looked at Renee with warm smiles. My mother was watching me with an expression designed to communicate that this was already settled and my job was to receive it gracefully. Renee was looking at her wine glass. She did not look at me. I put my glass down on the side table beside my chair. No, I said. My father turned to me with the patient expression of a man who believes he is managing a minor complication. Natalie. I'm not transferring anything. Not a controlling share, not a minority share, not a single percentage point. The business isn't available for transfer under the conditions you've just described. This has already been decided. By whom? I asked. You're not a shareholder. You're not an officer. You're not on the registered documents in any capacity. You don't have the authority to decide anything about Callaway, and neither does anyone else in this room except me. His patience evaporated. He pointed at me across the room in a way that silenced every side conversation instantly. You are standing in front of your family and refusing to recognize what your sister built. You would not have a brand worth protecting if it weren't for her work, and you are going to sit there and tell 30 people that she deserves nothing. I'm telling 30 people that she was paid $40,000 for that work under a contract she signed, and that completing a paid project does not entitle someone to an ownership stake in the company that hired them. That's not how business works. That's not how grandfathers will worked. And that's not how tonight is going to go. My mother stood up. She had been holding herself very still, which with her was always more alarming than movement. You are humiliating your sister in front of the entire family. Dad announced a transfer of my company to my sister in front of the entire family, I said. I'm just responding to what actually happened. I picked up my phone and typed 4 words to Diana. I need you now. She replied in under a minute. Leaving now. 18 minutes. I set my phone face up on the side table and waited. The room had the quality of held breath. Renee still wasn't looking at me. One of my younger cousins had taken out his phone. Not to record, I think just to have somewhere to put his eyes. My uncle from my father's side was looking at the fireplace with great concentration. My father tried twice more to reframe what had happened. First as a misunderstanding, then as an emotional overreaction on my part. I didn't argue with either attempt. I just waited. 18 minutes later, the doorbell rang. My mother answered it because she always answered the door and because she didn't know who was on the other side. Diana Cho walked into the holiday gathering in a wool coat with a document file under her arm, and my mother stepped back from the door with the instinctive wariness of someone who recognizes a professional on a professional errand. I'm Diana Cho, she said to the room. I'm corporate counsel for Callaway Hardware and Supply. Natalie asked me to come. My father's expression shifted. Diana didn't waste time on preamble. She opened the file at the dining room table, which had been cleared but still had the centerpiece on it, candles and pine cones and my mother's dried orange slices, and she laid out 3 documents side by side. This is the original ownership transfer agreement executed between Robert Callaway and Natalie Callaway 5 years ago. Natalie holds 58% of outstanding shares as majority owner. There are 2 minority shareholders, both non-family investors who came in 3 years ago. Neither is present tonight and neither has been contacted about any transfer. She indicated the second document. This is the current shareholder agreement, which requires majority approval for any share transfer and includes a right of first refusal clause for the existing minority holders. Any transfer of controlling interest triggers a mandatory notification period of 60 days. She placed her hand on the third document. And this is the current registered agent filing with the state, listing Natalie as sole registered agent. No transfer of any kind has been filed, initiated, or discussed at the corporate level. Whatever was announced tonight has no legal basis, no procedural foundation, and could not be completed without Natalie's active and willing participation at every stage of a process that would take months, not an evening. She closed the file. I'd also note for the record that Renee Calloway was engaged as an outside contractor for a brand consultation project 4 years ago. She was compensated in full. That engagement created no equity interest, no shareholder rights, and no legal claim to ownership. The characterization of that work as building the company's value, while potentially true in a marketing sense, has no bearing on ownership structure under the agreements that govern this business. She looked at my father. He looked at the centerpiece. The room was silent in the particular way that 30 people are silent when they have collectively understood that something they applauded 20 minutes ago was built on nothing. Renee got up quietly and went to the kitchen. I heard the back door open and didn't hear it close for a while. Diana left after 10 minutes. She squeezed my arm at the door and said nothing, which was the right call. I stayed for another hour because leaving immediately felt like theater, and I didn't need theater. I talked to my cousins. I helped my aunt find her coat. I kissed my grandmother on the cheek and told her the food was wonderful, which it was because my mother had made it and my mother was an excellent cook, and those two things were both true simultaneously. My father didn't speak to me again that night. He sat in his chair near the fireplace and accepted refills of his drink and talked to the people around him about other things. I wasn't sure if he was ashamed or regrouping. Probably both. Renee came back inside after about 20 minutes. She sat at the far end of the room and we didn't speak, but near the end of the evening she passed close enough to me that it would have been stranger not to acknowledge it, and she said quietly, "I didn't write the speech." "I know," I said. I didn't know that for certain. But I believed it was likely, and I thought she needed to hear that I wasn't positioning her as the architect of the evening. "Dad's been telling me for 6 months it was already handled," she said. "It was never handled," I said. "There was nothing to handle." Grandfather was clear. She nodded once and moved on. My mother called me 3 days later and said I had made Diana's visit feel like an attack. I told her I had made a phone call to my attorney because my father had announced a transfer of my business to a room full of witnesses, and that bringing counsel to correct a false public statement was a proportionate response, not an attack. He said I had always had a cold streak. I thought about my grandfather, the way he drove 4 hours to shake a stranger's hand rather than assume the deal was done, the way he documented everything because he understood that handshakes fade and paper doesn't. I thought about how he chose me not because I was the loudest or the most visible but because I asked the right questions and kept showing up. Callaway Hardware opened on schedule the Monday after New Year's. I was there at 7, same as always, walking the floor before the staff arrived. The business was fine. The business was always going to be fine. That was the part they never understood, that I hadn't been protecting an asset. I had been protecting something my grandfather spent his life building, and that was not something I was ever going to hand over in a living room with pine cone centerpieces while 30 people nodded along. He deserved better than that. So did I.